Hi, I'm Tom Ray, and welcome to another episode of the Lorenzo's Music Podcast. And this is a show where I talk to musicians, people who make things for musicians, and with a focus on open source, Creative Commons, and the Fediverse a lot. And because these are things I'm interested in. And today I have someone who is involved in the Fediverse, and I want to speak to them as a musician because I previously spoke with Andy Piper about OggCamp, and I've been really interested in the idea of unconferences. I love unconferences. I love conferences, forums about open culture, but I feel like there isn't one for music, and I want to know more about them, how they work, and how they get started. So today I have someone who is doing that. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell the people who you are and what it is you do?
Sure. Well, thanks, Tom, for having me. We might have more connections than you even thought. So I'm Johannes. I'm originally from Germany. I grew up in a place where the grandfather of Mozart installed the roof of the church tower. So there's an ancient musical history, and I almost turned into a musician, a classical musician, though, before I decided to be an engineer. Which I thought had the better business model, which was probably true. So I relate to music as well as technology. So I'm an engineer by background. I'm an entrepreneur. I also end up herding cats as I think of it, which is really a community management kind of functionality. And I've been doing this for a very long time, which is sort of an odd combination of things to do. And I think in the context of the Fediverse, a long time ago, over 20 years ago, in the heyday of blogging, remember blogging where everybody set up their own website and said, this is my place on the web, and here I am, and I'm going to publish to the world like any of the big publishers. I can do this on my own, and I'm going to write whatever I feel like writing about. And we built, at the time, I was very involved in this kind of thing. We built a whole bunch of technology around it. So, for example, that I could leave comments on your blog. And, we could sort of talk to each other, your blog against my blog, and we will have these common threads around. And that was about the same time as, Facebook and the likes got started. Except that, of course, they sort of won this in a way that they took all the oxygen out of the room. This whole idea of blogging, by and less, it didn't go away, but it became less sort of a mainstream kind of phenomenon than it had been for a few years. And then, of course, decentralized social media platforms sort of took over. When Elon Musk bought Twitter, I and so many other people said, hang on, this might actually be the best opportunity we've had in almost 20 years to sort of restart this and say, we have learned a few things. 20 years ago, when a bunch of us said, decentralized platforms, they are going to fail in a variety of different ways. And they will be bad for people. People look at me or look at everyone and say, what the heck are you talking about? It's so cool. I can connect to my friends, right? But the pretty much all of the downsides that were, I think, on the horizon for the people who were sort of in the know 20 years ago have come to pass, and a lot of others. I don't think anybody was thinking that, Facebook would be implicated in genocide, things like that. So, so all of these things have come to pass, and a whole bunch of other things have come to pass. All of a sudden, and people understand that now, that there's a problem, and all of a sudden there's an opportunity. And this is where the Fediverse comes in, and where the open social web comes in as a set of technologies that lets us connect with each other without some meddling middleman in the middle, direct, without an algorithm, without a Mark Zuckerberg model, business model, and all of these kinds of things. And so to come to the context that we're in, so I've started basically at when Elon bought Twitter, I thought, okay, there might be an opportunity here. Because there is a bunch of underground technology that's still around. How do we grow this? How do we make this a more of a mainstream thing? And I figured the first thing we need to have is a place where the people who work on this can meet each other. FediForum was created, basically. That was just the idea. Let's have a place where people can find each other and talk to each other. And we don't know what they will talk about, and we don't know what comes out of it, but that place is needed. And so that was the first FediForum, and we've been running it ever since. So in a couple of weeks, we have, I think, the 7th FediForum coming up. We're doing it online because our community is global. The people who care about this, are pretty much global.
Right.
There is no particular geography involved, just like music. It's a global phenomenon.
Yeah.
And so I've been running this, and as an unconference, which is really the kind of event structure or non-structure that encourages people who feel passionate about something to connect with other people who feel passionate about it and learn and teach each other and come out of it saying, wow, I learned so much. And I made so many new connections, and there's something happening here. And I think we've been rather successful doing that with FediForum. And I mean, I can take no credit for the model. The model has been around for like 40 years as an unconference model. I'm not really an unconference organizer either. I just fell into this because I saw a need from my particular community. There's unconference. If you look all over the place, they're usually a little bit not as prominent as the highly promoted, big shows, but they exist in all sorts of places.
Well, and that's what I like about it, is because it does give an opportunity to people who just have an idea or have something where it's like, oh, there's an idea, but there's something there, like it could be something more, or to see the popularity of people who go in the unconference model. I want to hear that. I want to be part of it. And the discussion is also a back and forth. It's not just here's the bunch of CEOs that are going to talk at this conference and, then hold up a new phone and go, look what I've created. It's actual ideas. And sometimes that's all they are at first, or they're they're just minimum viable products or something like that. So, yeah. And now, so I spoke with Andy Piper about an unconference before, and I love that format, and I really do. You're doing it online. Now tell me how you organize something like that online. That's one of the things that I'd really like to know, because that is an easier way It's an easier way for people to participate is what I mean, because there's no travel involved but that also takes out one of the elements, which is like you have a board, a board that you look at, where people show ideas and you brainstorming break out into rooms. So how does that work with an online forum like FediForum?
So do your listeners know what an unconference is, or should I spend a minute on explaining what it is?
You feel free to explain it as well for those who don't. A lot of them will, some of them might not. Let's err on the side of people might not know. So yes, go right ahead, please.
So let me tell you about my first unconference experience a long time ago. So I was used to academic conferences where you have a bunch of papers submitted, and there is a selection committee, and they read them out, and then you get to give a talk, and then you get up and you basically read your paper. Go through this. And then if you're lucky, there's maybe 5 minutes of question and answer at the end of the session, and then everyone goes back home. And this is a model that works for certain things, but it's sort of the exact opposite of what an unconference is. When I went to my first unconference, they said, "Oh yeah, and tomorrow we're going to unconference, and there's no agenda, and we're going to figure it out." And I was thinking, what the heck? What are you guys smoking? This is never going to work, right? But it works beautifully well. And the basic idea of an unconference, whether it's in person or it is online, is that people come to the event and they ask themselves, what do I care about? What are the subjects I really care about? Not just what do they present to me. I'm not just a consumer. What is the things that I care about? What are the topics? And some of them I go like, I have this thing that I know that might be of interest to other people. And I might want to talk about this. And that might actually be just something that occurred to you in the shower the day before. It doesn't have to be full-fledged. It doesn't have to be a paper and well-researched and a presentation and slides and all of these things. It just has to be a subject that you care about. Or the other subject, the other way around, I have a question. I always wanted to know something about this. I had some questions around this. I wonder whether there's other people who care about the subject and might know something about it. And then when the unconference opens, usually you need to have a facilitator, because without a facilitator, it probably would disintegrate real quick. But the facilitator will explain the rules of the game. But you making the agenda, and the way it basically works is that people who have a topic raise their hands and get in line, and then they announce the topic and say, I want to talk about subject X. And then the pick is slot in the, there's different schemes that people do and how they get assigned to a room or an online space. But basically you get assigned, or you pick a space that you're going to do this in a time. And then by the time the time comes around, you end up into the space, and anybody else who is interested in the subject shows up. And then what can happen here is, if you're very well prepared, sometimes people are, then they say, I have a slide deck, here's 10 minutes of slide deck, and I'm going to run through this because I want to present this in some structured format. Or it goes the opposite way, and it says, okay, I have a question, and the question is, what the heck is the Fediverse? Or how does it work, or anything like this. And people,
it can go as simple as beginning entry point level type things, is what you're saying. Yeah,
it can be all over the map. It is there's no. This is one of the beauties about it, which is that there is no shame, or there is no expectations as to where you are. You can go in the highest level expert detail that you might want, and that will attract certain people in the event and not attract others. Or you can start at the very, very beginning, where there is some very basic questions, and it will attract other people. But it will attract the right people in that room for that particular subject. And what tends to happen in conferences is that almost anybody who thought they had a plan for, the session, 45 minutes or an hour or whatever, it is, this is what I'm going to do. It disintegrates very quickly, because people talk to each other, and the conversation goes in some directions that you didn't expect, because the people brought in their knowledge and their interests. And very often you go I thought we were going to talk subject A, but we really ended up subject B, which I didn't even know existed. And now I learned so much about subject B, and I didn't get A done. It's something that was really good. And if you take notes in the sessions, as we encourage people to do, or many people encourage to do, then you can publish it to other people who might not have had a chance to go to the session, and build on that the next time you do the event. So I'm giving a lot of detail here, but it is, I think the way people come out of unconferences, if they're done well, there's also ways of doing unconferences badly. But if they're done well, people come out of it very energized. They come out with, I've heard people say, oh no, please don't do FediForum for 3 days. I can't do this. This is too strenuous. 2 days is way more than I can basically already process, because there's so much there. Which is very different from a usual conference, where you usually sit there and you go these guys keep droning on things that really nobody is interested about. Right? I mean, it happens in every conference on some panel. And you've heard all of this. I can read your press release. I don't need this. But that doesn't happen in an unconference, because it's a person-to-person interactive format. And so that model can be moved online. There is apparently an entire little industry that does this. It's harder to do online than it is offline. I'm very grateful to my friend Kalia Young, who pioneered that format that we've been using for FediForum, basically online during the top of the pandemic, for an unconference that has run for over 20 years now, called Internet Identity Workshop, and they were trying to get it online, and they came with a format that works really well, and we by and large just copying this.
Oh, really? And what is that? So how do you go about that format? One, what is it built on? I guess what's the backbone of it? Because it would mostly be videos, correct?
So there is a question about what's the right venue, online venue for doing this, and the truth is that the right venue doesn't exist. There's only approximations. It's simply the ideal venue. It doesn't exist. So there is versions of how you can approximate this. But the basic structure you want to have a video channel that is sort of the plenary, where everybody arrives at the beginning and where you explain how this whole event is going to happen, but you do common activities. And then, for example, agenda making is when you make the agenda, everybody stands up and says, "This is what we want to talk about and how it gets scheduled." This is a common activity where everybody needs to participate. And then you have breakout rooms, essentially, where where as many as you want, depending on how many people you have in the event. That you can basically, somebody can say, I'm going to be in space C at 9:00 or some such thing, and then. What is very helpful if these breakout spaces have some other tools beyond the video, such as a back channel chat, and note taking is, I think, the most important one. Some people do votes in there and do, moderate Q&A kind of stuff. There's a lot of stuff you can throw at it, but this is not really all that important. I think the important part is that you can break out into different spaces, and there's a lot of fear of missing out that people tend to have in unconferences, where there's like 3 or 5 parallel sessions, all of which are interesting to me. Which one do I go to? And so what tends to happen is that everybody has this all the time. And so if people take notes in the sessions, then you can go to one session and not feel completely left out on the others. It's also encouraged behavior, I should say this, which I make a point every time at FediForum, because it breaks societal norms. There is encouraged behaviors to leave sessions and join another sessions if that session isn't for you. Right? And we have been sort of taught that this is impolite, that you get up in the middle of an event and walk out. I was a very long time ago, but I was at university. I was some kind of student TA, and I told them, I don't want you to be here if you think that I'm not telling you anything interesting here. So if that is the case, I want you to walk out. And the first time that happened, that was actually kind of a shock to my ego. Here I am with the whiteboard and doing all these formulas and I'm feeling really good about myself, how smart I am. And half the class gets up and says, "Bye." But
you gave them the opportunity, but it's better.
I gave the opportunity
because otherwise they'd be sitting there and you'd find out later, like, oh, they hated it.
They hated it. It's not good for them. It's also not good for the other people in the room. Because if you have 20 people in the room and 15 of them are really bored, the atmosphere that you create in that room is going to go to the other 5. If these 15 people were to leave and only 5 were there, you could have so much of a better conversation than with all the dead wood around it. That's not interesting. So
and psychologically, it's one of those weird things too, where it's hard not to focus on the people that left at first, and it's weird to get around that. It's kind of like, say you have a newsletter and you have people that signed up, and every time you send out a newsletter, somebody unsubscribes, and like maybe it's 1 or 2 people, and you're like, well, why did they unsubscribe? They've been a subscriber for like 5 years. What? And it's like, no, think about the many other people you have on that list who are following because they want to. Don't focus on the ones who went like, you know what, I'm sick of this.
Right. I mean, I think the mindset here is different in the sense that if you are, let's say, giving a talk and you're broadcasting from stage the way we are used to in big conferences, then one of the things you're trying to optimize is get your message to as many people as you can. Right, you're trying to get everybody in there because you want to blast your message out to everybody, whether they want to hear it or not. Right, that's the idea. The unconference idea is very different, which is you're trying to connect to the people who really care about your subject.
You're right,
and so it's a very different mindset. And so let me say something here, which is I have participated in far more unconferences than I've ever run. So I'm not really an organizer myself. I'm far more of as a proportion, I'm far more of a participant than an organizer. This is just something that fell into my lap and it seems to work.
All right.
But I've seen many unconferences, and some of them are work really well, and you have no idea exactly why they work so well. And some others have turned out to be complete disasters. And so it happens, and it all boils down to the facilitator. So I would recommend for anybody who wants to do unconferences to get themselves somebody who has, at the very minimum, participated in a lot of different conferences, preferably get a facilitator who knows how to set this up in a way that doesn't derail. And it's not so obvious what this facilitator exactly does. but I have seen the difference that it makes, and so I would really recommend this. It has to do with not just the organization, but the entire atmosphere, the emotional. As musicians, we sort of know this, right? You're creating sort of an emotional sphere around what you do. It's not just that you're playing a few notes. You're creating a emotional space that your audience and you are in, and it's just like that. You're creating an emotional space as where then the kind of conversations happen that you want in the way you want. So, for example, people will disagree with each other, right? I mean, it's the whole point of these conversations, that they disagree with each other. How they disagree makes a gigantic difference to how well the event works. And whether people, and if you have competitors in the room, and it happens, right? Are they going to fall into the attack each other from the stage kind of thing that you see very often at normal conferences? Or are they going to constructively acknowledge its differences and maybe come up with some things they can do together to move the entire sphere forward? And that depends on the emotional context that's being set. It doesn't happen on its own, right? And so for example, at FediForum, we have had a whole bunch of projects that have come out of FediForum that nobody planned going in. Well, it basically goes like somebody says, I want to talk about subject X. And somebody else some other people show up who also want to talk about subject X. Nobody knows exactly how to solve this or how to proceed, but they're having a good conversation. And it's a highly qualified conversation because only the people who care about the subject, they have thought about this. And all of a sudden they say, we could do this, this, and the other. And a project has been born, right? Let's meet again next week somewhere, and we're going to do this, and you can do this and do that, and it sort of moves forward, and all of a sudden you have a kind of project that is very, that is it's not as a part of an organization. It's not part of some, it's not some working group of some kind of entity. It's just a bunch of people who want to do something together because they decide this is the right thing to do. And if I may sort of make a broader comment here, it's, I think, this is the kind of thing we need worldwide, where a bunch of people on whatever subject get together and say, this is screwed. We're going to have to fix this. Let's just find each other and start working on it, as opposed to waiting for the UN or whoever it is.
Well, and that's kind of the same way, not in a conference way, it's hard to say. I want to say it likens itself to open source in a sense, where if somebody doesn't like the way that the project is going, they create a fork and build off of that in a different manner. And that's kind of like the breakout, or no, maybe not, but still these things start from a discussion. It's hard. I get what you're saying. For some reason, I really want to connect it to an example,
So it is. I mean, there's lots of examples. We just have, in the industrial society, we have sort of been taught that this is not how the world works. But it used to be, I mean, if you in your village and you look and you notice that the creek through the village is silted, I mean, what will you do? You got to go to your neighbors and say, hey, the creek is silted. We have a problem here. We need to fix this somehow. And then, I mean, you're not waiting for the city council that might not even exist in your traditional village, right? You just find a bunch of people and say, do we have this common problem? What are we going to do about it? And then you do it. Right,
that's the way it works. Far more colorful than mine. I love that. That was poetic. That was like you just wrote a short story.
But we have to be so trained that there is somebody who's in charge of things, and we have to do it the way this particular thing works. In all sorts of society, we have been sort of almost disabled. We have been given away that sense of agency, that sense of power. We can just do things. And it certainly relates to open source. I mean, open source is sort of the thing, right? Where somebody writes a piece of code and says, because I can just write this, and somebody else says, oh, that's cool. I have an idea. I'm going to improve this. And this is actually, there's a parallel here, because if you look like the large open source projects that, for example, have a lot of commercial support as well, it's not like there is a joint venture with the CEO, and then they're assigning engineers to it, and there is a top-down plan how they're going to do this. This is not how it works. It's a bunch of engineers in the companies who said, we really ought to be doing this, and they get involved, and then they drag the management around and say, I need so much time for this.
Yeah.
And then good things happen because the people on the ground who had opinions how this was supposed to work and were qualified to do something about it connected with other people and other companies and others, and they just did it. Right? I mean, this is how a lot of progress works, and the unconference format is sort of in that vein. I mean, it's not related to coding. There's unconference and all sorts of things. I just got an invite for I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm just got an invite for a bioregional unconference on figuring out the various ecological projects related to the San Francisco Bay Area bioregion. There's lots of things. I was in a conference years ago that was talking about how to get democracy back. There's lots of things you could do. Now, I'm not entirely certain what the topics I would expect in an conference for musicians, but and I think it has to probably be steered a little. There's this old quip that I remember. I don't remember who it was attributed to, but this musician was asked who he most likes to talk to, and he says, bank directors. And he goes like, why bank directors? And he says, bank directors always want to talk about music, and I love talking about music. When I talk to musicians, they always want to talk about money. Right? I don't like talking about money. So there's this discussion about where exactly does the conversation go, and maybe there's some expectation setting that needs to be done. That not the conference for musicians is not all about money or whatever, but it can be done.
I think a lot of it would be, and this was my thoughts on it, and I spend a lot of time in different discourses and Discord rooms and things like that, where people are talking about what can be done, how can we get away from people owning streaming, how can we improve payment of streaming. I think a lot of it would be that. And for regular music conferences, everybody's just going to show you how you can make something to go viral, or that's what those conferences always are, or how to present your stuff to a record label. Nobody needs any of that. Most people figure out how to use their social media better and before anybody else is going to teach them to do it. Those people are learning from the people that are doing it, who are successful doing it in their own places. I think it would be more because of stuff like, and this person spoke at one of your FediForums or presented there, I believe. Yes. Ben Pate from Bandwagon, who actually was using that as an example for his language that he built, Emissary, and he just happened to build a Bandcamp alternative, which right now that is the only option, and everybody thinks, not everybody, but most musicians are like, oh, just use Bandcamp because you really own it yourself. No, they've already been bought and sold 3 times. Nobody knows what's going to happen with Bandcamp. You don't own it yourself. It's a Twitter. It is, at any moment it could be, hey, your music that's on here, we own it now because that's part of the contract you signed when you signed up. Stuff like that. You never know. And going back to how you originally stated it with the blogs, things like that ruined some of the stuff that people are going, this wasn't that bad and it was a smart idea. We self-owned blogs. We self-owned the RSS feeds that made blogs. Then everybody went like, well, everybody's just posting it to Facebook anyway, so just use that and then we don't have to spend money on this. Things like that. Anyway, sorry, went off on a little rant there. But you can see, like, these are the things that I think could come up for musicians at a conference like this.
So it's been a very long time since I've been a practicing musician, and a lot of stuff has happened electronically, that didn't exist at the time I was. But it strikes me that as a musician, the model where you hand over your music to some record label that then basically plasters this over the world, which is sort of what a lot of people sort of striving for at the top end of the scheme, is really not one that really relates to what you're trying to do as a musician. I mean, most musicians, I'm sure there's the conquer the world, plaster the world kind of, people in music, just like everywhere else. But most musicians aren't doing that for that reason. They're doing this because they have something to say. And what do they have? Who they have something to say to? Well, it's not even just say to, but say with. It's a thing. It's the connection between you and your audience, right? Or your fellow musicians. It's a social thing. And what you do there depends highly on the kind of music you do. As I said, I had a classical music background, so I'm a huge fan of chamber music, where you have a small number of basically musicians making music together without the central authority, and it is very beautiful, and you can bring your audience into this. Now, if you apply this kind of stuff to the internet, then the logical structure for this is that for example, you do your rehearsals in public. I always thought, for me as a ex practicing musicians, the rehearsals that the few that are recorded are always much more interesting than the performances. Okay, because
What instrument did you play, by the way? What was the instrument of?
Two. I started on the piano and then went into the violin.
Oh wow! Okay.
So anyway, so the rehearsals are much more interesting because you can see how the people actually think about this music and what works and what is good and what's not. And so for me, I mean, that's not just for me, but this kind of thing is a great opportunity to create a community around the music. And I don't think that the commercial platforms are any good at this. No. At least for me, what I'm seeing. And so there, with Ben Pate's project and the various kind of projects that are innovating in this decentralized social media space, where we're trying to rethink of how we interact online. I mean, that's really what we're trying to do in the Fediverse, in the larger movement. We're trying to rethink and experiment with how do we best interact online. And it is clearly not just, one post after the other that makes you angered in various ways, which is what the commercial platforms have turned into. How do we interact with this? And if you started from scratch and said, okay, I'm playing my instrument by myself, fine. Let's add one more person. Let's add 2 more people. Let's add 50 people. What is the interaction I want? Because it's not just the music either. It's not just the performance. It is the things around it. You might want to talk about why you care about this particular tune here, or which particular recording from 27 years ago some musician you were particularly impressed by, and why. And you might have people in your audience who actually know more on the subject than you do. There's people who are experts on these things. How can we create communities? And the word community is so overused, but how can we create groups of people that can do these kinds of things and be really happy about it? And that's the kind of innovation that we want to have in the Fediverse and the open social web, because now we have open protocols and we have a lot of the infrastructure that these kinds of things of innovation can happen. What we now need is the people who are actually in these particular communities, such as musicians around a particular thing, and say, this is what would be optimal for us. Right? So as an example, there is a company, a not-for-profit called A New Public. They are doing some innovation around local social media for local communities, basically a better form of Nextdoor. And they basically really went out there and said, okay, here's our communities. We have the exact definition of what we want. Let's really figure out how to make this work for them. And because there's now these open protocols, they can innovate around this and build the things that are exactly right for them, as opposed to the things that they're trying to roll out for billions of people and throw the advertisements down our throats all the time. And so these kinds of things are not possible. So Ben is doing this with Bandwagon and in various kinds of environments. And so if you have any people in your audience here who are software related inclined, there's a ton of opportunities to do this. Now, we haven't figured out yet what exactly the business models for these things are. Right now, the entire space is very badly funded because we don't want to do ads and we don't want to do so many things. We don't want to sell data, but we haven't figured out what the business models are. But it will get figured out. The whole Patreon kind of model is really fascinating. The whole creator model is fascinating in the sense that a lot of people are willing to fund the kind of projects that they get joy from. And it has to be packaged up in a way that it works and produces a living for the people in that environment. But I think it can be done, in particular, if the software environment, the community environment, is the one that is really conducive to doing that. And what we know from the commercial social media is just not. It's pretty far away from what is ideal. So there's a ton of opportunity. And the commercial people aren't going to do this because they can't, because the size isn't big enough for them. They want to roll the same software to 1 billion people, but this is not how our communities work. right?
Right.
Every musician, we don't have only bands that are for a million people, a billion people. They don't even want to do this. They want to do something for for a community of people who thinks and feels like they do, and that's the software, the size of the software we need for that as well.
Well, and the other thing too is, much like you were saying, the people who are building these things, there is a model that people are trying to figure out a better model to make them without advertising, without all that stuff. And what's super funny about that is when people make these things for musicians that are corporations that, much like Spotify, don't pay you a lot. Here's the thing about musicians. We also don't have money. That's the entire thing. Musicians spend up to it, like, depending on whether or not they pay for software or use open source software or buy gear or go into a studio, a song that that even when they were available for download was worth 99 cents. And you probably spent well over a couple $100 just to get the gear and recording time to do that song. So it's the business model of being a musician is also difficult. We're all just trying to figure out how to do this. And that's another thing is we're also not business managers. We make music because we want to be part of a community. And then after that, it's much like most of the movements. It's like, well, how do we make this work? We all definitely agree with each other. And having those ideas, is how you do
exactly.
it. Yeah.
And this is where I think an unconference format is actually ideal, right? Where you put a bunch of people in there and say, okay, let's figure this out. Nobody has a particular plan, but everybody has some thoughts about what may or may not work. Right. And everybody gets smarter, and there's no competitive pressure in the sense that, I have to keep this thing secret that my competitor doesn't know about it, because you all win if something comes to being that solves the problem that is very similar for everybody. Yes.
And that also is the type of thing where talking about it openly is where someone else is going to say something that it gives them an idea. And even if that idea doesn't spark how it goes forward, it could go, no, that won't work, but you gave me an idea. And this is what was missing from what I was building. Like the whole thing is just brain synapses going all over the room. And that's what I love about it. Yeah. And I want to ask you one more thing before we go here. Now, you also have a company that focuses on the open web and open, just the open web in general, Dazzle Labs. I only briefly looked at Dazzle Labs, and I'm curious about that. Tell me about Dazzle Labs.
So there isn't a whole lot to say publicly. Basically, what we're building a bunch of technology. We haven't released anything really yet. Technically, FediForum is a project of Dazzle Labs from a purely organizational perspective, on a legal perspective. But what most of the public effort goes into is basically creating a market. Meaning that there is a thing that exists that can self-sustain itself, that is big enough that And the reason I'm saying this is that I've been around this decentralized social thing for long enough that I've seen several of the waves where it goes like, oh yeah, this time it's going, and then it didn't.
Right.
Whenever it was in the early 2010s or so, it was like Diaspora at some point. It got a ton of press. Even Mark Zuckerberg invested in it, but it sort of flamed out, and it goes up and down. And I don't really want to do great big product announcements and serving customers until the point where it's clear there's a market, because so that's where I've been essentially distracted from Dazzle Labs. The primary thing into let's attempt to build a market, which is why I'm doing FediForum, which is why I am supporting things like there's now an Open Social Web Award. That is out for call for submissions till the end of the month, I believe. That's gonna be it has like a 20,000 euros in prize money to be handed out in Amsterdam in June. And this is why I'm doing a developer network, and this is why I'm doing all sorts of things to basically make this market work. And then we can say, okay, what are we going to sell in this market exactly?
I love it, man. The passion behind it. That's awesome. And now, also, this interview will be coming out a few weeks from when we're speaking right now. Do you have anything you'd like to mention to people? Projects coming up, things that are happening, anything in the future you'd like to tell people about?
There is a ton of interesting stuff happening, and there's now so much that even for somebody like me who organizes events, I sometimes don't know what other events are happening. And I know this because
Okay.
we almost scheduled an event on top of somebody else's Fediverse event.
Oh,
There's now so much movement happening that it's getting not crowded, but it is really good to see because so much is happening. So for that reason, on the FediForum site, we are attempting to track all the events. It started out just
you are.
as for
Okay.
our own purposes, but it is generally useful. So fediforum.org/events has all the events in the broader
Oh,
open source web that we are aware of.
oh, I like
So
that.
that
I
would
didn't know
be
that that's what that
hopefully a
was.
good,
Okay.
yeah. So I think what's coming up, the next event I believe is what we're doing with FediForum Online at the end of April, and then there is going to be an event in Amsterdam at a public spaces conference where they're doing the Open Source Awards. That's an in-person event, and then there's various in-person events all around the world, and there is occasionally online events. I say most of the online events we do with FediForum, but I think your listeners might have fun in pretty much all of them. I would think.
Yeah. And I now I want to check. I was looking at that events thing and I was like, God, you guys are doing a lot of stuff. No, those are other things. I love that. That's awesome. That's actually really handy. And how often do you guys do the FediForum? Is it yearly? Is it biannual? Is it how often do you do it?
So FediForum is basically every 6 months, the main event. But we have done a few special events outside of the schedule in addition. Like, for example, last September, we did an event with a book author who wrote a book about the Fediverse. And we do basically a book tour kind of event, just virtual. Like you would have done it, at the bookstore, because, our audience kind of likes to hear about these things. And recently I did an event with Meg Masnick, who is pretty well-known author from Tech Dirt, sits on the Blue Sky board on a special event focused only on how we growing this thing. How to grow the open source web. So we're doing some special purpose events as well. But the primary FediForum is twice a year. And we do basically 2 or 3 days of mostly Unconference. We've added some keynotes because people wanted to hear from some important voices in the community. And we also do demos, speed demos, which goes beyond the Unconference format, but it is also quite useful. We basically invite a small number of projects to do 5-minute demos of whatever cool software they built in the space. And so it's just 5 minutes, so that nobody gets bored if some software isn't for you, right? And you can see in a very short amount of time, you can see a lot of innovation that happened. And then we encourage the people who do the software to run an Unconference session afterwards, where then there can be the discussion on whatever they want to talk about specifically. That format has worked pretty well. And if anybody's interested, check out fediforum.org. There is session notes from pretty much all sessions that I've ever run. It's probably the single largest body of knowledge about decentralized and open protocol-based social media out there. And we also have recordings of all the keynotes and the software demos, which sit on PeerTube, which is another one of the applications in the Fediverse.
Yes. And you literally answered the last question I was going to ask you, which was, is more information on fediforum.org, and do they have videos of some of those breakouts in those 5-minute sessions? And you absolutely just told us about that. So
we don't record the actual Unconference sessions. We only take notes because then people can speak more freely. And they can edit some comments out if they don't want them to be published. So because we want them to be sessions that are really productive, and not everybody should have to monitor every one of their words all the time for the future when some kind of gotcha journalist comes by.
Yes.
So basically, that's the idea. The keynotes is different. The keynote speakers presumably know what they're doing, and the demos also.
I think that's what I'm referring to, because there have been a lot of tech people who have, after the fact, shared like their breakout or their presentation just as a what this is sort of thing. And I think I'm just remembering those. But that's good to know as well. Well, I want to thank you so very much for talking with me today. This has been great.
Okay, thank you for having me. I had fun.